Constantinople, June 1826. The cauldrons are overturned. The Janissaries are in revolt. Sultan Mahmud II has authorized a newly drilled military formation, and the most famous infantry corps in Ottoman history understands the threat immediately. This is not a dispute over uniforms or parade ground exercises. It is a struggle over who possesses the authority to reshape the Ottoman state and who can survive that transformation. The Janissaries assemble around the Et Maidani, the old meat market beside their barracks and one of the capital's traditional centers of military agitation. Their regimental cauldrons are more than cooking vessels. They are corporate symbols, binding soldiers through shared provisions, shared privilege, and shared identity. To overturn them is to declare that the ordinary relationship between ruler and servant has broken down. The corps has rebelled before. Its members know the familiar sequence. The barracks rise. Urban discontent spreads. Religious authorities hesitate. Palace factions begin calculating which side offers safety. Ministers are surrendered. Policies are withdrawn. Sometimes the sovereign himself is removed. For generations, rebellion has functioned as negotiation conducted under the shadow of violence. Mahmud, however, has studied the destruction of earlier reformers. He knows that military force alone cannot defeat an institution embedded in the capital's economy, neighborhoods, religious networks, and political memory. The Janissaries cannot merely be attacked. They must first be isolated. Their uprising must cease to appear as a defense of Ottoman custom and become, in the eyes of the empire's decisive constituencies, an assault upon the dynasty, the faith, and public order. The government moves rapidly. Loyal palace forces mobilize. Artillery is positioned. Religious and political authorities are pressed to support the sovereign. The sacred standard associated with the Prophet Muhammad is brought forth, invoking the highest available language of imperial and religious legitimacy. The conflict is classified not as a disagreement within the Ottoman military household, but as treason. That classification changes the battlefield. Neutrality becomes dangerous. Support for the Janissaries can now be represented as rebellion against the sovereign and the sacred order he claims to defend. Mahmud is not simply preparing to fire upon mutineers. He is deciding who will be permitted to define the meaning of the crisis. Then the artillery opens fire on the barracks. There is no need to linger over smoke and shattered masonry. The greater spectacle is political. An Ottoman dynasty that once entrusted the Janissaries with conquest, imperial security, and the physical protection of the Sultan is using the methods of civil war against its own celebrated guardians. The state has reached a terrifying conclusion. It can modernize only by declaring war on part of itself. I am Professor Adrian Lockewell of Archives of Humanity, examining the machinery of empire from the council chamber, battlefield, treasury, and barracks. The Ottoman government would remember this confrontation as the Auspicious Incident. The name itself contains a verdict. In the official account, a corrupt, disobedient, and dangerous military corporation had finally received deserved punishment. The Sultan had rescued the empire from men who had betrayed their original purpose. Destruction became purification. Centralization became deliverance. Yet political language does not merely describe violence. It organizes memory around the interests of the victor. The word auspicious transformed bombardment, execution, imprisonment, exile, confiscation, and institutional annihilation into an act of salvation. It placed the government on the side of order before later generations could examine how that order had been created. Thousands of soldiers, dependents, craftsmen, religious affiliates, and urban associates could be absorbed into a single official category: enemies of necessary reform. Modern scholarship has treated that official certainty with greater suspicion. Avigdor Levy, in the military policy of Sultan Mahmud II, reconstructs a prolonged struggle over military reconstruction, political survival, and centralized authority. Virginia H. Axon, in Ottoman Wars, 1700 to 1870, situates the confrontation within the strategic and fiscal pressures bearing down upon an empire fighting increasingly expensive wars. M. Sukruhanioglu, in A Brief History of the Late Ottoman Empire, places the abolition within a broader transformation as Ottoman rulers sought new military, bureaucratic, and ideological instruments of control. From this perspective, June of 1826 cannot be reduced to the spontaneous punishment of rebellious soldiers, nor can it be understood merely as a sudden eruption of conservative rage against innovation. The uprising was real, but so was the political preparation that shaped its consequences. Mahmud's government had learned from earlier failures that reform survived only when its opponents could be deprived of allies, legitimacy, and room for negotiation. The dynasty did not simply defeat a revolt. It controlled the category into which the revolt would fall. That distinction exposes the central paradox of the Janissary story. The corps had been created to embody dependence upon the sovereign. Its men were supposed to derive position, salary, identity, and advancement from service to the ruler. They were intended to strengthen the dynasty against military commanders and hereditary interests possessing independent sources of power. Over centuries, however, the Janissaries acquired interests of their own. They became capable of influencing accessions, demanding payments, protecting privileges, removing ministers, resisting military programs, deposing sultans, and participating in the killing of a sovereign. The ruler's servants had become participants in deciding who could rule. That transformation raises a question larger than military decline. Were the Janissaries Christian boys forcibly taken from their families and converted to Islam? Were they enslaved servants who could rise into privileged imperial careers? Were they disciplined professional infantrymen who helped the Ottoman state exploit gunpowder, siegecraft, and centralized command? Were they palace dependents, administrators, craftsmen, merchants, neighborhood patrons, guild associates, or an armed political interest group? At different moments, they were all of these things, but never in the same proportions, never under the same conditions, and never without conflict. The familiar story offers a cleaner answer. Disciplined warriors built the empire. Privilege corrupted them. Commerce weakened them. Hereditary access diluted them. Reactionary self-interest turned them against military progress. Finally, a determined reforming sultan removed the obstacle and opened the road toward modernization. It is a powerful narrative because it gives institutional history the shape of a moral fable. Obedience produces greatness. Comfort produces decay. Reform restores order. But institutions rarely move through history with such narrative discipline. The Ottoman state itself changed. Its wars became longer and more expensive. The cities grew. Its markets and tax systems became more complicated. Firearms altered recruitment and battlefield organization. Inflation damaged fixed salaries. Succession politics turned military payments into bargaining rights. Soldiers formed families, entered trades, developed neighborhood ties, and became part of the social world they had once been designed to stand apart from. Under those conditions, adaptation could resemble corruption, especially to rulers who wanted direct command. A soldier protecting customary pay might appear greedy to the treasury. A corps defending established privileges might appear treasonous to a reformer. An institution integrating into urban society might become more useful as a social network while becoming less controllable as a military instrument. The official accusation of corruption may therefore reveal genuine deterioration, political propaganda, or both at once. The Janissaries could obstruct necessary change without being irrational. The government could pursue military reconstruction without becoming morally innocent. Reform and self-preservation operated on every side. This is why the artillery at the Et Medani matters far beyond the destruction of a famous corps. The confrontation reveals a recurring danger within organized power. Rulers create institutions to solve immediate problems. Those institutions accumulate salaries, rituals, legal claims, internal loyalties, allies, and memories. What begins as an instrument becomes a constituency. What begins as dependence becomes bargaining power. Eventually, the creator may discover that the institution can no longer be commanded without first being politically defeated. Yet that insight does not settle the Janissaries' history. It sharpens the mystery. If the corps had truly become nothing more than a decayed military interest group, its destruction appears brutal but strategically comprehensible. If it remained a functioning army and a deeply rooted part of Ottoman urban society, the Auspicious Incident begins to resemble something broader, a centralizing purge whose victims extended far beyond active mutineers. If both interpretations contain truth, then the crisis was not a contest between progress and stagnation. It was a collision between rival visions of the Ottoman order, each carrying its own interests, fears, and forms of coercion. The guns of 1826 provide the ending, but not the explanation. They show what the relationship between dynasty and corps became after centuries of conquest, expansion, fiscal pressure, social integration, and political revolt. They do not explain why Ottoman rulers created such an extraordinary institution in the first place. That answer lies centuries earlier, before Constantinople became an Ottoman capital, when the dynasty was not yet the master of an intercontinental empire. It was one vulnerable contender on the fractured frontier of 14th century Anatolia and the Balkans, surrounded by rival principalities, fading kingdoms, mobile warriors, ambitious commanders, and loyalties that could be purchased, negotiated, or betrayed. In that unstable world, inherited power was both indispensable and dangerous. The dynasty needed soldiers who could conquer territory without acquiring an independent claim to govern it. It needed servants whose fortunes began and ended with the ruler. The institution destroyed by Mahmud II in 1826 began as an answer to that problem. Engineered loyalty still had to survive the supreme test of campaign. On that larger chessboard, the Janissaries were neither an isolated warrior brotherhood nor anything resembling a modern national army. They were the salaried infantry corps of a far broader dynastic war machine, one whose power came from coordinating institutions that had different weapons, obligations, and political loyalties. The Janissary corporate unit was the Orda, Each order possessed officers, barrack space, payroll records, traditions, and symbols that transformed individual dependence into collective identity. The most potent symbol was the regimental soup cauldron. Eating from the same vessel represented membership in the same military household. Defending it became a matter of corporate honor. Salary tied the soldier to the treasury. Barracks tied him to his comrades. Hierarchy tied the unit to the palace. Much later, overturning the cauldron would announce that these bonds had been broken. Ottoman armies succeeded because they combined specialists. Provincial Timur cavalry supplied mobility and regionally based manpower. Akinci raiders screened advances, gathered intelligence, and disrupted enemy territory. Artillerymen operated cannon. Armorers maintained weapons. Engineers bridged rivers, excavated trenches, and attacked fortifications. Fleets transported troops and contested waterways, while vassal and irregular contingents enlarged the army without becoming identical parts of it. The Janissaries generally occupied the protected center near the ruler, providing infantry whose service extended beyond the seasonal obligations and local interests of provincial cavalry. Older European narratives often attributed Ottoman victories to fanaticism or inexhaustible manpower. That explanation concealed the machinery that actually made expansion possible. Rhodes Murphy in Ottoman Warfare, 1500 to 1700, emphasizes distance, supply, roads, taxation, weather, and campaign timing. Gabor Agostin, in Guns for the Sultan, demonstrates that the empire did not merely borrow gunpowder weapons from a technologically superior Europe. It built foundries, arsenals, procurement networks, and cadres of technical personnel suited to an imperial theater stretching across several continents. Constantinople in 1453 revealed this system at full pressure. Sultan Mehmed II did not conquer the Byzantine capital because one colossal cannon shattered history in a single blow. Artillery bombardment had to be coordinated with naval pressure, blockade, trench work, mining, repeated assaults, and the continuous movement of food, powder, timber, men, and replacement equipment. Great guns commanded attention, but smaller cannon, ships, scouts, laborers, engineers, roads, and administrative records sustained the siege. The Janissaries participated in the final attacks as disciplined infantry, but the conquest was a combined arms achievement. Mehmed maintained pressure on land and sea, transported vessels into the Golden Horn, absorbed setbacks, and forced the defenders to divide their limited strength. Caroline Finkel, in Osman's Dream, places the victory within a dynastic transformation. Constantinople was not merely captured territory. It became the imperial capital through which an Ottoman ruler could claim universal ambitions. The Sultan's presence was both command mechanism and theater of sovereignty. He received intelligence, judged reports, rewarded service, disciplined commanders, and imposed strategic unity upon forces recruited through radically different arrangements. Yet the army assembled around him also displayed the political order. Provincial cavalry, household infantry, technical corps, tributaries, and the sovereign at the center. Command and ceremony reinforced one another. That architecture appeared again at Mohacs in 1526. Sultan Suleiman I advanced into Hungary through a system of roads, river transport, supply points, reconnaissance, and carefully controlled timing. The Hungarian kingdom, divided among magnates and weakened by financial and political conflict, accepted battle before every possible reinforcement had assembled. Its heavy cavalry remained formidable, but courage could not compensate for strategic isolation. Ottoman deployment coordinated cavalry maneuver, artillery, firearms, infantry, and reserves. Janissaries near the Sultan provided a stable center, while guns and field defenses helped absorb and fracture attacking formations. The battle was brief. Its consequences were generational. King Louis II died during the retreat, the Hungarian succession broke apart, and the resulting struggle drew the Ottomans and Habsburgs into a contest that reshaped Central Europe. Mohacs did not prove Ottoman invincibility. It demonstrated how operational coordination could convert an afternoon of tactical collapse into the destruction of a rival political order. In the last Muslim conquest, Agostin emphasizes the adaptability behind Ottoman expansion. The decisive advantage was not a mysterious appetite for war, but the capacity to align technology, intelligence, logistics, manpower, and dynastic purpose. The Janissaries themselves adopted arquebus and other firearms. Their later reputation as automatic enemies of military technology projects the conflicts of subsequent centuries backward. During the 15th and 16th centuries, firearms increased the value of drilled, salaried infantry. Janissaries could fight behind fieldworks, operate near chained guns, defend the center, and remain available as a reserve around the sovereign. Their reliability gave commanders something that territorially rooted military systems often struggled to produce: armed men whose immediate service did not depend upon the interests of a hereditary magnate. Victory, however, carried a hidden arithmetic. Every conquered province required fortresses, garrisons, officials, roads, and revenue. Every campaign consumed grain, animals, powder, wages, and political credit. Every successful institution produced new constituencies expecting reward. The Janissary salary, the ulufe, was therefore more than payment. It recognized status. The accession gratuity, the ulufe, transformed the enthronement of each sultan into a financial negotiation with armed servants whose loyalty had entered the ritual of succession. By the late 16th century, that bargain was under pressure. American silver entered interconnected European and Mediterranean markets and contributed to inflation. Ottoman coinage suffered debasement, while prolonged wars increased the costs of weapons, animals, grain, and manpower. Fixed salaries purchased less. The government saw an expanding military expense. Soldiers saw a dynasty failing to honor the obligation that made obedience legitimate. The long Turkish War, from 1593 to 1606, intensified these pressures. The Habsburg frontier demanded garrisons, siege operations, repeated mobilization, and growing numbers of musket-bearing infantry. Difficult terrain stretched supply lines. Casualties, desertion, and recruitment disrupted established arrangements. Payrolls expanded, but the state's ability to determine who genuinely served, who claimed privileges, and who merely possessed connections did not expand at the same rate. Janissaries increasingly married, established households, entered crafts and commerce, and formed alliances with guilds, neighborhoods, provincial notables, and local officials. Some obtained tax advantages. Muslim-born men, sons of Janissaries, clients, and associates entered a corps once theoretically replenished through the devshirm. The devshirm gradually disappeared, while Janissary identity spread beyond the barracks. Traditional decline narratives describe this as contamination. Unauthorized recruitment diluted discipline, marriage weakened corporate life, and commerce displaced warfare. Simil Kafadar, in On the Purity and Corruption of the Janissaries, warns that corruption was not a neutral diagnosis. It was often a political accusation constructed by chroniclers and reformers who compared a complicated present with an idealized past. Baki Teskin, in the Second Ottoman Empire, instead places these changes within a broader renegotiation of military power, social participation, and sovereignty. The revisionist correction does not make every dysfunction imaginary. Payroll fraud, absenteeism, patronage, and declining readiness could be real. Yet commerce did not instantly erase military capacity, and Janissary affiliation no longer described one uniform occupation. Some men remained active combatants. Others primarily held payroll rights or corporate status while working as artisans, merchants, guards, or local brokers. Virginia H. Axon, in Ottoman Wars, 1700 to 1870, traces the hybrid arrangements created by military and fiscal adaptation. Soraya Faroki, in Subjects of the Sultan, reveals the urban world surrounding them. Workshops, markets, petitions, neighborhood alliances, and negotiated privilege. The barracks remained powerful, but information also circulated through coffee houses. Rumors concerning coinage, taxation, appointments, campaigns, and succession moved rapidly among soldiers, artisans, clients, and religious figures. No single conspiracy controlled every orda or provincial affiliate. The corps contained rival patrons, generations, occupations, and interests. Its social reach nevertheless created a new capability. A quarrel inside the palace could now ignite a political crisis across the capital. The warning had appeared at Bukaktepe in 1446. During the crisis surrounding Sultan Murad II's return to power, Janissary unrest over pay and debased coinage revealed that salaried infantry could pressure the dynasty itself. If the currency failed, obedience became negotiable. If a new ruler required an accession gratuity, celebration became leverage. The cauldron now acquired its darker meaning. To overturn it declared that the shared meal, and therefore the relationship of service, had been repudiated. These uprisings were not meaningless eruptions of mob violence, but neither were they modern constitutional politics. They were coalition struggles conducted through corporate symbols, patronage networks, religious sanction, legal claims, rumor, and coercion. The most terrifying rupture followed Sultan Osman II's unsuccessful Khotan campaign in 1621. Reports claimed that the young ruler intended to curb Janissary privilege and construct alternative forces, possibly using troops from Anatolia or other regions. The precise scope of his plans remains disputed. Gabriel Peiterberg, in An Ottoman Tragedy, shows how later accounts rearranged blame according to competing political agendas. In the capital, however, perception became politically decisive. Many believed that Osman intended to escape the institution capable of constraining him. In 1622, revolt consumed the government. Osman was deposed, imprisoned, and killed. The sovereign's servants had murdered the sovereign. The constitutional shock reached beyond one victim. Sacred ancestry could no longer guarantee a sultan's physical survival. Janissaries supplied decisive force, but palace factions, officials, religious authorities, artisans, and urban crowds helped make deposition possible. Military power still required legitimacy, or a convincing performance of legitimacy. Istanbul had become a marketplace in which competing coalitions bargained over who possessed the right to rule. Intervention could defend customary privileges against arbitrary taxation or disruptive policy. Could also paralyze rulers confronting strategic danger. Mark David Baer, in The Ottomans, situates these upheavals within a political culture where sovereignty was mediated by religious authority, urban society, and armed power. Teskin interprets some 17th century conflicts as struggles over restraints upon the ruler, while Kafadar cautions against treating every protest as decadence and every janissary as a reactionary. The Patrona Halil revolt of 1730 exposed the full reach of that urban politics. Patrona Halil had once been a janissary, but the movement that ended the Tulip era and deposed Sultan Ahmed III was not simply a barracks coup. Disaffected soldiers, artisans, religious voices, and opponents of elite consumption and government policy converged. Military grievance became formidable because it fused with social anger. The Janissaries were now soldiers, wage claimants, shopkeepers, neighbors, patrons, and brokers of succession. Removing them could no longer be treated as an administrative adjustment. Reform threatened livelihoods, privileges, identities, and networks extending through the capital and the provinces. Foreign pressure made delay increasingly dangerous, but premature reform could still cost a sultan his throne and his life. By the 18th century, danger no longer came only from palace conspiracies, disputed accessions, or overturned janissary cauldrons. It pressed inward from the frontiers, where the empire's rivals were learning to coordinate armies, taxation, diplomacy, and violence with increasing precision. The Habsburg and Russian empires were not uniformly efficient military machines, just as the Ottoman state was not a motionless relic awaiting European instruction. All three struggled with corruption, immense distances, fragile supply lines, unreliable commanders, regional resistance, and the crushing expense of permanent war. Adaptation was uneven on every side, yet the strategic balance was shifting. Russian armies improved their artillery organization, fortifications, staff work, and logistical systems. Habsburg officers pursued more standardized drill and increasingly elaborate military administration. Diplomatic coalitions amplified battlefield pressure. Ottoman enemies coordinated alliances, contested the Black Sea, cultivated influence among Christian populations, and forced Constantinople to defend several frontiers at once. The Ottoman government responded with experiments of its own. It employed European technicians, strengthened artillery institutions, translated military texts, reorganized fortresses, opened technical schools, and tested new formations. Virginia H. Axon, in Ottoman Wars 1700 to 1870, rejects the convenient image of an empire simply refusing modern warfare. The more difficult problem was political. Every new regiment required revenue. Every new tax threatened an exemption. Every new appointment displaced a patronage network. Every reform created potential winners and immediate enemies. The Russo-Ottoman War from AD 1768 to AD 1774 exposed the widening danger. Ottoman forces suffered severe reversals on land and sea. Russian power entered the Black Sea with unprecedented confidence, while the destruction of the Ottoman fleet at Sezim demonstrated that distance no longer guaranteed security. The Treaty of Kukuk-Kanarka compelled the Ottomans to recognize the formal independence of the Crimean Khanate, preparing the ground for Russia's annexation of Crimea in AD 1783. Russia also acquired territorial, commercial, and diplomatic advantages that later statesmen would interpret expansively. This was more than a lost war. It revealed that the machinery connecting taxation, recruitment, provisioning, command, and diplomacy had itself become a battlefield. Courage could not compensate indefinitely for administrative fragmentation. An army might contain experienced fighters and still fail if the state behind them could not concentrate resources at the decisive place and time. Sultan Selim III understood the warning. His Nizam-i-Sedid, or New Order, was not merely an attempt to place Ottoman soldiers in European uniforms. It combined newly drilled troops, foreign advisors, technical education, revised artillery practices, expanded diplomatic representation, and a search for more reliable command. Its financial foundation was the Ired-i-Sedid, or New Revenue Treasury, supported through redirected income and additional fiscal claims. Stanford J. Shaw's Between Old and New presents Selim as a pivotal reformer trapped between inherited institutions and a changing strategic environment. Older modernization theories often reduced his struggle to a contest between rational Europeanization and irrational reaction. That interpretation conceals the price of reform. A separately financed army could become the armed foundation of a more centralized court. Provincial notables feared the loss of revenue and autonomy. Janissaries saw a rival institution that could eventually erase their privileges. Religious critics distrusted foreign influence and unfamiliar practices. Taxpayers encountered reform not as an abstract promise of imperial survival, but as officials demanding additional money. palace factions understood that military reconstruction would redistribute access to the Sultan himself. Resistance therefore joined groups with different motives. Some defended custom, some defended income, some feared central despotism more immediately than Russian invasion. Others calculated, correctly, that Selim's success would mean their political extinction. Their opposition was not a single ideology. It was a coalition created by overlapping threats. In AD 1807, unrest began among auxiliary troops assigned to defend the Bosphorus. Led by Kabaksi Mustafa, the rebels rejected new order practices and moved against a capital already saturated with suspicion. Janissary participation, religious authorization, court rivalry, and urban agitation transformed a military mutiny into a dynastic revolution. Selim hesitated. He dismantled parts of his own program in an attempt to preserve the throne, but concession displayed vulnerability without satisfying his enemies. He was deposed, and Sultan Mustafa IV replaced him. The new order had been defeated politically before it could prove itself strategically. The struggle resumed in AD 1808. Alemdar Mustafa Pasha, the powerful provincial notable of Rus, marched toward Constantinople intending to restore Selim. The palace answered with murder. Selim was killed before Alemdar could rescue him. Prince Mahmud survived an attempt to eliminate him and emerged as the dynasty's remaining viable ruler. He ascended the throne as Sultan Mahmud II, protected by armed men whose commander now dominated the government. Alemdar attempted to reconstruct reform through the Sekbani-Setid, another drilled force designed to preserve the substance of Selim's program under a different name. But Alemdar's coalition was narrow, his authority conspicuous, and Janissary hostility immediate. Renewed rebellion engulfed the capital. Trapped in his headquarters as insurgents closed around it, Alemdar died in an explosion. The reform force was suppressed. Mahmud remained on the throne after witnessing two reform programs destroyed, one sultan murdered, and one powerful protector consumed by the forces surrounding military change. Each catastrophe became strategic information. Selim had exposed reform before politically isolating its enemies. Alemdar had possessed armed strength without durable legitimacy. Both had attempted to build a new military institution while the old corporation retained its religious associations, urban networks, political vocabulary, and capacity to mobilize the streets. Mahmud learned that visible reform, undertaken before control of intelligence, appointments, artillery, and legitimacy, could become an announcement of weakness. Avigdor Levy, in the military policy of Sultan Mahmud II, emphasizes that Mahmud's eventual victory emerged from years of preparation rather than a sudden act of courage. The Sultan adjusted appointments, cultivated loyal artillery and palace forces, expanded surveillance, weakened rival households, and gradually reduced the autonomy of provincial power holders. He treated religious legitimacy not as ornament, but as an operational resource. Selim Derinjal's The Well-Protected Domains, although centered on a later Ottoman period, illuminates the broader governing logic. Centralization depended on more than coercion. State power had to present itself as the defender of legitimate order. Force became far more effective when opponents could first be classified as enemies of faith, dynasty, and public peace. By the 1820s, rebellion in Greece, foreign intervention, fiscal strain, and Janissary military limitations intensified the pressure. Mehmed Ali of Egypt had demonstrated that disciplined forces organized beyond the Janissary structure could become formidable. Mahmud's opportunity was approaching, but he did not openly announce the complete replacement of the corps. Instead, his government introduced the Askinci Project, a limited formation in which selected Janissaries would receive new drill within an ostensibly acceptable institutional framework. The proposal appeared narrow. Its implications were immense. Drill required supervision. Supervision produced measurable standards. Standards made performance enforceable. Enforceable performance threatened the negotiated autonomy on which Janissary corporate power depended. In June AD 1826, the cauldrons were overturned. Janissaries assembled around the Et Maidani and denounced the innovation. Earlier sultans had encountered such scenes as violent negotiations. The corps would rebel, allies would gather, the palace would retreat, and a settlement would preserve much of the old balance. Mahmud treated the uprising not as a negotiation, but as the opening his government had prepared. The rebellion was classified as treason. Leading officials and religious authorities were assembled. Legal judgments and sacred legitimacy moved behind the throne. The sacred standard was displayed, calling loyal troops, religious students, and inhabitants of the capital to defend the sovereign order. Reform was no longer being presented as one disputed policy among many. The state had transformed reform into a test of loyalty. That was Mahmud's decisive maneuver. The Janissaries expected a bargaining crisis. The palace constructed a war against rebels. Provocation, revolt, legal isolation, mobilization, bombardment. Loyal artillery and palace forces attacked the Janissary barracks around the Et Maidani. Cannon fire broke positions that had once embodied the military guardianship of the dynasty. The barracks burned. Men who resisted or attempted to escape were killed or captured. Contemporary reports, official accounts, and later narratives provide sharply different casualty estimates, so no dramatic total can be treated as secure. What remains certain is that the violence continued after organized resistance collapsed. Executions, arrests, interrogations, exile, and confiscations spread through the capital and into the provinces. The government named the event the Vakei Herai, the Auspicious Incident. The phrase was itself an instrument of power. It converted a purge into providence, transformed centralization into deliverance, and instructed Ottoman society how the violence was to be remembered. M. Sukru Hanioglu, in A Brief History of the Late Ottoman Empire, places the abolition within Mahmud's broader construction of a more centralized state. Frederick F. Anscombe's State, Faith, and Nation in Ottoman and Post-Ottoman Lands helps explain why religious classification mattered so profoundly. Political violence required a moral category. The Janissaries had to be represented not as soldiers defending customary rights, but as rebels defying legitimate Islamic sovereignty. The corps was formally abolished. In its place, Mahmud established the Asakiri Manshurai Mohammadi, the victorious soldiers of Muhammad. Even the name fused military reconstruction with religious legitimacy. This was not secular modernization openly declaring war on tradition. It was a centralizing monarchy claiming that military reform restored the proper order of faith and empire. The purge also entered the religious sphere. The Bektashi order, closely associated with Janissary identity, was suppressed. Lodges were closed, destroyed, or transferred. Leaders were executed or exiled. Property was confiscated. The relationship between the Bektashis and the Janissaries had evolved across centuries and cannot be reduced to a single foundation legend. By AD 1826, however, that association gave the government a reason to target the spiritual and social architecture surrounding the core. Destroying the Janissaries meant dismantling their sanctuaries, symbols, memories, and networks of solidarity. Axon and levy therefore direct attention beyond the artillery. Mahmud prevailed because he controlled timing, intelligence, appointments, armed force, political language, and the definition of legitimacy. He denied the Janissaries the broad coalition that had protected earlier uprisings. Officials, jurists, clerics, artillerymen, and urban loyalists were forced to choose between the sovereign and a stigmatized military corporation. Once that choice had been publicly framed, neutrality itself became dangerous. The official word, auspicious, concealed the human radius of the punishment. Those harmed included far more than active mutineers. Families lost salaries and protection. Artisans lost customers and patrons. Coffee houses and neighborhoods lost political intermediaries. Bektashi communities were driven underground. Property changed hands through confiscation. Censorship and official chronicles disciplined memory after artillery had disciplined the capital. Mahmud had removed the institution that destroyed Salim's new order and Alemdar's Sekbani Sedid. He had solved the political problem that killed his predecessors. But abolishing an old army was not equivalent to constructing an effective new one. Beyond the ruined barracks remained Russia, revolution, fiscal weakness, administrative scarcity, and the unforgiving judgment of war. After the cannon fire, there was silence. The Janissary barracks had been shattered, the corps abolished, and its name proscribed. Men once protected by rank and corporate solidarity were executed, imprisoned, exiled, or stripped of property. Coffee houses were closed. Guild connections were investigated. Neighborhood alliances disappeared from public view. The Bektashi order, long associated with Janissary identity, was suppressed. Lodges were confiscated or transferred, and adherents were driven into discretion. A visible social world had been erased, renamed, or forced underground. Mahmud II had destroyed a veto player. He had not yet built an army. The new victorious soldiers of Muhammad required far more than drilled recruits in new uniforms. The force needed officers capable of transmitting commands, schools capable of producing those officers, barracks, standardized weapons, physicians, hospitals, reliable salaries, systems of recruitment, and records detailed enough for the state to know who served, who deserted, who had been paid, and who existed only on paper. Every musket implied a workshop or a foreign supplier. Every uniform implied production and procurement. Every regiment implied taxation. Every order issued from Constantinople required officials able to enforce it far beyond the capital. Institutional destruction could be accomplished in days. Institutional construction demanded years of money, discipline, expertise, and administrative memory. As Carter Finley explains in Bureaucratic Reform in the Ottoman Empire, the military transformation formed part of a much larger expansion of centralized government. Mahmud's state pursued censuses, ministries, salaried officials, new chains of command, and increasingly intrusive systems of record-keeping. The abolition strengthened the palace's claim that organized coercion belonged to the central state alone. It also accelerated the rise of a bureaucracy capable of reaching further into provincial and urban society than the older imperial household had ever managed. But greater reach did not guarantee greater competence. Centralization was not automatically progress. The Janissaries had obstructed military restructuring, manipulated successions, and sometimes turned organized violence against the sovereign. Yet they had also become intermediaries between government and society. Through markets, guilds, coffee houses, barracks, and neighborhood networks, they carried grievances upward and political messages outward. Their methods were factional, coercive, and frequently violent. They were not a parliament in uniform, and their revolts were not an early form of democratic constitutionalism. Still, their presence imposed limits. A ruler considering a new tax, a currency manipulation, or a military innovation had to calculate the reaction of an armed corporation embedded in the capital's social fabric. Mahmud removed that constraint. The state became more capable of issuing commands and less exposed to one powerful form of organized resistance. Modernization was therefore also a redistribution of fear. The palace feared the barracks less. Ordinary communities faced a government increasingly able to count, conscript, tax, monitor, and discipline them. M. Sukruhanioglu, in A Brief History of the Late Ottoman Empire, warns against treating this transformation as a simple march toward modern government. The reforms after 1826 expanded administrative capacity, but they emerged from military emergency and dynastic survival. Their primary purpose was not liberal emancipation. It was the preservation of the empire through a stronger sovereign apparatus. The international system allowed no triumphal pause. The Greek War of Independence continued. European intervention deepened. At Navarino in 1827, British, French, and Russian warships destroyed the Ottoman Egyptian fleet. The empire had eliminated its most notorious internal military corporation, only to watch a vital fleet annihilated by foreign powers. War with Russia followed in 1828 and 1829. The new Ottoman forces were still developing their command structures and supply systems. Russian armies crossed frontiers that political purification could not defend. Fiscal weakness remained. Provincial autonomy remained. Diplomatic isolation remained. So did the empire's strategic geography. Long borders, exposed coastlines, rebellious provinces, and rival powers prepared to exploit every failure. Virginia Axon in Ottoman Wars 1700 to 1870 demonstrates why military reform cannot be reduced to uniforms and European drill. Armies operate inside fiscal, demographic, logistical, and political systems. A regiment may march in perfect formation and still collapse because its officers lack experience, its treasury is exhausted, its supply lines fail, or its commanders fear the palace almost as much as the enemy. The most devastating proof came not from Vienna or St. Petersburg, but from within the Ottoman imperial system. Mehmed Ali of Egypt had constructed a disciplined army supported by conscription, taxation, training, surveillance, and reorganized administration. As Khalid Fahmy shows in All the Pasha's Men, this achievement rested upon immense coercion. Peasants became entries in state records, subjects of medical inspection, and bodies extracted for military service. The new army was effective partly because the machinery behind it was invasive. Mehmed Ali's forces defeated Ottoman armies and advanced into Anatolia. At Konya in 1832, the Sultan's forces were broken. At Nezib in 1839, they were defeated again. The irony was merciless. Mahmud had destroyed the Janissaries to clear the road for a modern army, yet a provincial ruler had built a more formidable centralized military machine and turned it against the dynasty. Abolition had solved a political problem faster than it solved a military one. Mahmud could reform without Janissary permission. He could not manufacture experienced commanders, industrial capacity, fiscal stability, or geopolitical security by decree. His reign nevertheless established foundations later expanded during the Tanzimat era. Ministries, military schools, diplomatic institutions, and bureaucratic practices helped create a new administrative framework. But military centralization was not identical to legal equality, representative government, or liberal reform. The same machinery that regularized administration could intensify conscription, taxation, censorship, and surveillance. The decisive question is not whether the post-Janissary state became modern. It is what kind of modernity emerged, who gained power within it, and who paid for its new capacities. That question destroys the familiar morality play. The Janissaries did not begin as heroic innocents and end as decadent villains. They changed because warfare, finance, succession politics, urban society, and the Ottoman state changed around them. A dependent household infantry became an institution of conquest. The conquest institution became a salaried corporation. The corporation became an urban stakeholder. The stakeholder became a political veto player. And the veto player became the target of centralizing violence. Halil analyses the Ottoman Empire, The Classical Age explains the institutional logic that had once made the Sultan's household forces so useful. Their status gave the dynasty trained servants who depended upon imperial favor rather than hereditary landed power. Within the classical system, that dependence helped the central government balance provincial cavalry, frontier commanders, and aristocratic interests. Older decline narratives interpreted marriage, commerce, payroll expansion, unauthorized recruitment, and political intervention as proof that the core had abandoned its original purity. In that account, corruption destroyed discipline until abolition became unavoidable. But corruption was not merely a neutral diagnosis. It was a political accusation. Reformers and chroniclers used the term to separate legitimate authority from interests they wanted discredited. Simul Kafidar, in On the Purity and Corruption of the Janissaries, challenges the myth of an uncontaminated golden age followed by simple decay. Institutions adapt because their environments change. Adaptation can preserve relevance while making centralized command more difficult. Baki Teskin's The Second Ottoman Empire pushes the argument further, presenting the 17th century order as a transformed political system in which soldiers, scholars, officials, and urban groups bargained over sovereignty. Virginia Axon likewise places military change within the pressures of war and finance rather than treating Janissary conduct as an isolated moral failure. These interpretations do not absolve the core of mutiny, coercion, privilege, or regicide. They explain why so many people possessed material reasons to defend it. The same balance is essential when confronting the devshirm and elite slavery. Legal unfreedom could coexist with salary, education, office, and astonishing advancement. A forcibly recruited Christian boy might rise beyond the position available to most free men in Europe. Yet advancement did not erase separation from family, compulsory conversion, or ownership by the ruler. Privilege and victimization were not opposites. They were intertwined elements of a system that converted human dislocation into imperial power. The Janissary story therefore reveals a deeper strategic law. Rulers create institutions to escape dependence on existing elites. They recruit outsiders, construct professional cadres, grant privileges, and reward internal solidarity. At first, the new organization appears obedient because its survival depends upon its creator. Success changes the equation. The organization accumulates expertise that rulers cannot easily replace, wealth that can finance resistance, traditions that justify autonomy, networks that mobilize allies, and a collective memory that outlives individual sovereigns. The instrument becomes a stakeholder. Its declared mission and its institutional survival cease to be the same objective. Military establishments, intelligence services, bureaucracies, corporations, and political parties can follow the same curve. Each may begin as a solution to disorder, dependence, or inefficiency. Each can acquire interests of its own. The danger does not arise only when institutions become corrupt. It arises when identity, livelihood, prestige, and security become inseparable from structures originally designed as tools. Reform then threatens not an abstraction, but an entire ecosystem of human lives. The verdict requires neither imperial propaganda nor Janissary nostalgia. The Janissaries did not single-handedly build the Ottoman Empire, and they did not single-handedly break it. They magnified the strengths and contradictions of the political order that created them. Their discipline strengthened conquest. Their solidarity stabilized service. Their integration extended imperial influence into urban society. Those same qualities later gave them the power to bargain, resist, depose, and survive beyond the military logic of their creation. The empire destroyed the Janissaries only after the Janissaries had ceased to be merely an army. Mahmud won the immediate contest, but the crises that followed revealed the limit of his victory. A political obstacle had been eliminated through state violence. The harder work of building durable military, fiscal, and administrative capacity had barely begun. The central government emerged stronger, more ambitious, and more coercive. The empire remained vulnerable. History becomes most useful when it moves beyond heroes and villains and examines institutions, incentives, and the dangerous distance between power created and power controlled. The video on the end screen continues that investigation. Watch it next to follow the struggle between authority and the institutions built to serve it. Subscribe to Archives of Humanity for deeply researched histories of strategy, power, and the systems that shape civilization. And leave a verdict in the comments. When an institution becomes inseparable from society, should it be reformed gradually or abolished completely?